Hello, I'm a Dragon, and this is A Certain Scientific Railgun, the show worth watching for a single story arc. Again, that does not mean that this arc is the only part of the show worth watching, just that... My god, the Sisters arc is so good. It's gotten to the point that one of the most accepted watch orders for A Certain Magical Index, the base series that Railgun is a spin-off from, starts with the first season and a half of Railgun, just so that the Sisters arc hits as hard as it possibly can. Like, imagine if you said, I want to get into Cheers, where should I start? Then someone speaks up and says, you're gonna want to start with the first 2 seasons of Frasier, and the general consensus is, yes, start with the first 2 seasons of Frasier. In fact, maybe ditch Cheers altogether and just watch more Frasier. That's actually how I discovered Railgun, just looking up watch orders for Index. Past that point, I watched all of Index in order to expand on Misaka and Shirai. For me, this was ultimately a waste of time. This is a show worth watching for a single story arc, not 2 shows worth watching for a single story arc. That show is Railgun. If Index is your thing, that's great, it's not mine. Anyways, Railgun. The whole show has a few things really going for it, but the one that I need to mention before all others is that I love these girls. Misaka, Shirai, Ueharu, and Saten are such a great quartet of girls that in this series that is full of seedy, underbelly, scientific exploration, corrupt higher-ups, and potentially world-ending danger, I still enjoy watching these girls sitting around getting ice cream at a festival or the beach episode. Sorry, the beach episode. I'm sorry, the beach episode. Point is, I could watch them doing whatever and I'll still love them. And they're so supportive in ways that aren't super obvious. For example, we've got the girls picking up Saten after what is basically the equivalent of summer school, somewhere they did not need to be, but it was surely welcome for Saten. Great, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm picturing something more like this. Saten notices Misaka checking out childish swimsuit designs, clearly with some level of fascination. So, what does she do? Is it A, deride her taste as the more socially in tune friend, B, advise her on something that might flatter her more, or C, let her do her own thing, it's her choice after all? For those that chose C, close, but it's actually secret answer D.
あ、それ可愛いですね。本当だ。フリフリもいい感じです。
Encourage her, and get Ueharu to do the same because they both know Misaka likes childish things, but is kind of embarrassed about it. So they use positive peer pressure, pushing her to do something she really wants to, but would probably shy away from if left to her own devices. Another is the actual namesake of the show. Not just Misaka, who has the nickname Railgun, but the abilities that get her that nickname. She's got electric superpowers in this world where powers are a dime a dozen, but she's still among the most powerful in the city. 3rd ranked level 5, in fact. What that means is kind of vague. Like, how the hell does anyone know this, let alone everyone? How do you compare all of this when the abilities are so wildly different? And how confident is anyone about this when Big Dumbass Energy, Head Bitch in Charge, and Teenage Taser are all barely out of elementary school? Meanwhile, frickin' laser beams, god hacks, and physics nerd are all firmly established in the criminal underbelly of the city. And it's a running joke that nobody knows anything about the 6th ranked. Anyways, Misaka is super strong, but versatility is what is actually notable about her. In addition to simple lightning bolts and such, we see Misaka use her skills to mess with electronics, magnetically cling to walls or move metal, and even protect her own brain's electrical signals against the brainwashing abilities of another level 5. But the selling point, and the namesake of the show and character, is the Railgun. Such an awesome signature move, using an arcade token projectile at hypersonic speeds, and the little flip that she does beforehand is great for tension. And, more importantly, style. You're unlikely to see it on anybody's list of favorite anime signature moves, however, which is a damn shame. Listen, I love United States of Smash and Giga Drill Break as much as the next guy, but if your signature move is punch but harder, or weapon but bigger, you might want to try having some ideas but better. But the girls are in every story arc, and the Railgun shows up frequently enough as well. So what makes the Sisters arc so much better? Well, let's take a quick look at the other arcs, then compare. First off, Level Upper, a story about a song program that increases the abilities of all the espers who hear it. It starts off as a rumor before very quickly elevating to terrorist bombings, something that, of course, our girls need to solve. The people who used the program start to collapse, making Misaka feel guilty about playing down the significance of her own abilities, specifically to Saten. She teams with Judgment, basically a student police force, to help solve the issue that leads to a fight with a woman who we learn her tragic reasoning for developing the program, then having Misaka fight a psychic fetus to save the world. Cool starter arc, really gives you the feel of Railgun with all that you could hope for. Urban legends becoming acts of violence, leading to a grand conspiracy and 2 final boss fights. But the best part is the character shown by Saten and Misaka regarding the power disparity between them, Misaka being a force of nature and brushing it off as no big deal, and Saten being a normal girl surrounded by people with superpowers and being told not to want more. Second, Big Spider. Really short, 2 episodes dealing with a released inmate wanting to disband his former gang and a side character's involvement with said inmate. Not really similar to the rest of the Railgun anime canon, and not really what I signed up for, but a nice little side story. It's fine. Third, the Poltergeist arc. Somewhat of a continuation of the Level Upper arc because it ends with finding the missing students from that arc. Wearu makes a new friend, Harui. Harui is present during a number of earthquakes and is detained by this very mentally stable woman. That woman then commandeers the missing students from the Level Upper arc after being led to them by Misaka, and plans to use them to create an unprecedented Level 6 Esper, regarded kind of like a person ascending to godhood. The best parts of this are Weharu naively standing by her friend despite overwhelming evidence that these events are tied to her, and, again, Misaka insisting everything is her fault and doing something about that. Sisters is next, but we'll come back to that. Next up is Silent Party, and I think it gets a bit of a bad reputation. The plot is not what shines here, as we've got an antagonist with an inferiority complex because espers are prioritized over intellect in Academy City, which is a hypothesis that has zero justification, given the fact that every other arc, both before and since, is scientists abusing the espers of Academy City in various ways to further their own ends. What it does do well is drive home Misaka's character growth from the Sisters arc and make very good use of the extended cast, as well as address the question of personhood in regards to manufactured humanoid beings. Past that is Season 3, my favorite whole season, mostly because the tone whiplash from Sisters to Silent Party is night and day, while Daihase Festival and Dream Ranker are both very good in their own right. First up, Daihase Festival. It takes place during a school festival involving a whole lot of athletic events, and honestly there is so much stuff to cover here to do the complexity of this plot justice, but we'll cut it short and just say this. A whole bunch of side characters really get to show off. Shirai, Weharu, and Saten are all brainwashed regarding their friendship with Misaka. Misaka teams up with Shokuho, a huge rival and the reason for the brainwashing. Shirai showing her divine, ridiculous competency. Shokuho defeats the biggest bad of the series so far. And Misaka gets essentially sidelined because she ascends to level 6 and becomes the unwilling, mindless antagonist for the least interesting character ever to deal with, alongside the himbo of Academy City. The best part of this is how much the side characters get attention, and the worst part of this is how much Misaka gets attention. Seriously, our main protagonist becomes the final boss, and her rival gets to subdue such a significant core antagonist? Such a letdown. Still, great arc. Finally, we've got Dream Ranker. Dream Ranker is, in my opinion, the arc to beat. We've got solid side stories in terms of Shirai and Weharu saving people and animals from a public park going up in flames, as well as Saten teaming up with Fremda against a sniper assassin. There's a new evil team that shows up, Scavenger. The question about what really makes a person is asked yet again through our final plot point. Kariba Ryoko being a person split in half into 2 cyborgs left to live their own lives but have separate experiences. Then, recombining them into a full person and a full android, but with potentially 2 souls among them. In addition, this arc has a ton of good fight scenes, including a kaiju-like, mech-like battle between what appears to be Zekrom and Groudon. So then, why is the Sisters arc better than all the others? Well, the one before Sisters tends to deal heavily with Misaka's guilt regarding her abilities and power disparities between her and people near her. The ones after Sisters tend to focus on the expanded cast more, as well as on the discussions of what being human really means. The Sisters arc both addresses her guilt and introduces the humanity discussion, and in the future, it opens up the prospect of side characters getting developed. In terms of narrative, though, in short, it has to deal with the stakes at hand and Misaka's personal relationship with them. We'll put a pin in that for now. We'll come back to it later. Let's break down the Sisters arc bit by bit. We start off with rumors going around about money cards in abandoned alleyways and remote places throughout the city, causing many people, including Saten, to go about patrolling odd spaces to get some cash. This leads Misaka to a girl, Shinobu, who had been distributing these cards in an effort to get people into those remote areas in order to get some eyes on the blind spots of the city and uncover what might be happening. She also mentions the rumor about clones of Misaka hanging around, which is probably nothing considering it's coming from someone willing to burn cash in untold amounts to have random civilians take back roads from time to time. Also probably nothing, because as a child she volunteered her DNA to assist with research into muscular dystrophy. Bet that won't come up later. So far, this is normal Railgun stuff, urban legends and rumors clearly setting up future events, but the Sisters arc is the most that we get to see of a staple of the series, Misaka in spy mode. She infiltrates a pharmacology lab and discovers plans to make a perfect level 5 clone of herself, but the project was scrapped and deemed impossible. Good news! All that accounted for nothing, and not like this city has a history of seedy science projects getting scrapped in the past and repurposed to horrific ends. Regardless, the naive Misaka talks with her friends, happy about the end of this whole situation. Casual conversation about clone stuff, and again, the naive Misaka says something she doesn't understand the full extent of. By the way, this conversation here is another place where Railgun is doing good stuff in this arc. Specifically with Misaka and Shirai. The relationship is an odd one throughout the series where they're clearly good friends, but Shirai has a tendency to become a very thirsty lesbian. This, however, is one of the best times this dynamic gets a chance to breathe and take a much more serious tone from Shirai's perspective. Even though she doesn't do much in this arc plot-wise, we get a whole lot of her perspective that drew her to Misaka in the first place. Admiration and respect. But now that they're friends, mixed in is a whole lot of concern alongside that. It is a great way to sideline your character physically, but still have her be involved emotionally. Back to the story, Misaka spends a whole day out in the world, hanging with some kids, getting this cute Gekuda badge that she's embarrassed to like, and finds herself. Yeah, turns out the clone rumors are legit, and she found one trying to get a cat unstuck from a tree, being concerned about what could happen if it falls. Misaka helps the clone get the cat out of the tree, tries grilling her for info, and they share some ice cream before splitting up with Misaka getting pretty much no info at all. The clone is cute, a little bit dumb, and really just kind of lost in the world. Kind of like that stray cat, but with an inherent tie to our protagonist. Misaka has some questions, and after a brief call with Weharu, she gets a few answers. And this is where we're gonna start talking about stakes. Stakes are a pretty simple concept used to describe what happens from the outcome of a story. For there to be any sense of tension in a story, there's got to be something at stake. Whether that's something small like a lost bag, or something huge like the fate of all the main characters and millions of unnamed characters in Academy City. Now, if the stakes are too high, it becomes harder to believe that our protagonist could ever lose, because if all the protagonists die, well, we don't really have much of a story anymore, do we? Railgun has a bit of a problem where the stakes always seem to be stupidly high, so you know there will always be a success in the end goals of the story arc. But it's how it gets to that point that Railgun likes to play around with. We know in Level Alper that this psychic fetus isn't getting into the nuclear facility, destroying everything relevant in the show, but what about our lost kids? That is still up in the air. In the Daihase Festival, we know Misaka isn't going to destroy the city and herself, but what about our mad scientist and our rival? What about Misaka's friends regaining their memory? Or half a dozen side characters in their own fights throughout the development of the arc? Those characters, or the emotional stakes of memory, for better or for worse, are expendable. We care about them anyways, but stories can be told regarding Misaka without those characters or their friendships. It's like if in your personal life you saw headlines about some tragedy, let's say an industrial explosion killing 8 people, versus if you're walking to work and see on one of the stoplight posts there's a notice about Cinnamon, a lost cat last seen a week and a half ago, and a phone number and address listed to contact the owners. One of those things is demonstrably worse than the other, but the lost cat is likely a lot more personal to you. You and people you know likely haven't been the victim of an industrial accident, but you do know somebody that's lost a pet before. You can recognize one of those kinds of pain much easier than the other because you've dealt with it, and because it's being advertised on your street corner, not broadcast to the whole nation. In short,
I can pick up this pencil, tell you its name is Steve, and go like this.
Oh.
And part of you dies. Because people can connect with anything.
This is where the Sisters arc shines like few other stories can. You see, the answers that Misaka uncovers is the driving force of the Sisters arc. Accelerator, this guy, has been chosen by some shady people to attempt to ascend to the aforementioned level 6. How they've decided to do this seems to be the equivalent of killing boars in the forest until level 60. Except instead of 65,340,285, it's only 20,000. And instead of virtual boars, he kills our main protagonist. Clones that she just met one of. People who look like her. Sure, she's a bit naive, but they have a moral compass enough to help a cat out of a tree, and insist that this badge is precious enough because it was given to her by her big sister. And because they're clones, raised in a lab under controlled conditions, you can assume they're all just as naive and helpless as this one. 20,000 of them, and this one is number 9,982. Almost 10,000 deaths, and if nobody stops it, there's gonna be over 10,000 more. So, while we, the audience, get to see all of Misaka number 9,982 fighting futilely against Accelerator, getting her leg ripped off, and spending her last moments crawling towards and cherishing that badge that her big sister gave her before she gets crushed by a train, Misaka proper only gets to see that last part of this. And, worth noting, Accelerator is having fun with this, playing like it's a game of tag. And this was personal. This isn't some theoretical press a button, 20,000 people die and you get stronger. Every single one of these kills are individual, scheduled, and violent. Again, 10,000 down, 10,000 left to go. So, understandably, Misaka is furious and goes to fight him, throws everything she has at him, and he no-sells her Iron Sand, no-sells hurled I-beams, and no-sells the railgun itself, casually, to the point where Accelerator is momentarily confused why she's suddenly stunned after her strongest attack isn't just ineffective, but it's reflected back, narrowly missing her. He acts like it's not a big deal because he views them as lab rats and wind-up dolls, and he's not content with being the strongest. He wants to be unchallengeable. But at the same time, he's perfectly content trying to kill Misaka proper to make it go faster. Accelerator doesn't care if he's killing people or not. As powerful as he is, the man will make up excuses to pretend he's not a monster. He only stops when the clones step in to state that it might ruin the whole project. The clones go to clean up the mess, while a bereaved Misaka asks why they're participating in the project, getting answers that they're just lab rats. Fake bodies in fake minds that cost about $1,600 each. So, after having what I'd label as the most traumatic time I've ever seen put on screen, Misaka stays out all night on a bench dwelling on what she just saw before she's approached by Shinobu again and explains how she's processing the whole deal. She comes to the conclusion that the clones can't be human if they're that accepting of their own deaths, so she doesn't need to help them. But she's not terribly fond of the people who set up the project in the first place, so she's gonna shut that down. Sure, you spent the whole night outside dwelling on what happened after getting as close as you can to witnessing your own murder, and now it's just not that big a deal. We might come back to that. We get some of that good girls supporting girls stuff again, where Misaka is clearly having a hard time talking about stuff, and the other three recognize this, say you don't have to tell us anything if you don't want to, but if you're ready, we're here for you. Love these girls. Shirai's got a whole episode about learning to let Misaka do her own thing, and her own thing she does. Before the labs even know what's going on, Misaka is able to completely trash a majority of them, but upon realizing what's happening, these shadowy people shut down her remote operations and order some security. We then take a bit of a detour from the main story plot for a few episodes that are entirely action. So episodes 8 through 10 of this season are almost entirely filler, in the same way that the majority of action scenes are. You know, just like you can have Indiana Jones without the temple escape, or Inception without the rotating hallway, you can have the Sisters arc without the fights against Item. The greater plot isn't explored much at all here, and as such, I won't be going into great detail. But if you came here to see Railgun doing Railgun things, this is where you're gonna get the majority of it. With only a couple labs left to ruin, we're introduced to Team Item, some mercenaries that are brought in to guard them while they evacuate the data and materials. We start with Misaka fighting Frenda, who uses plenty of bombs she can detonate remotely by igniting tape. When backed into a corner, she bluffs about filling the room with explosive gas and fights Misaka hand to hand. When the bluff is revealed from the explosive tape, Misaka gets the upper hand before two more members show up, Mugino and Takitsubo, at the end of episode 8. Mugino, or Meltdowner, fires essentially lasers and is the 4th ranked level 5, right behind Misaka, and she harbors great resentment over that placing. Takitsubo has a form of tracking people at long distances. Grouping these three together, Misaka spends the majority of episode 9 evading bombs and lasers fired extremely accurately and gets worn down quite a bit. When Meltdowner realizes exactly who they're dealing with, she dismisses the other two to deal with Misaka personally. Which she isn't fully able to do. Duh. There's a number of great moments in these episodes. I love Misaka counting down to 0 but not frying Frenda, Meltdowner getting smacked in the head by one of the bombs, and the final triumph of Misaka, trying to save Meltdowner and the response being a whole lot of bolts being fired up from the abyss. In the end, Misaka is ultimately successful in shutting down both labs, but doesn't know that things have just been relocated from the second lab that she gets to. And with Misaka thinking she's finally done destroying all the labs, we are done with the Sisters story arc. Everything's wrapped up in a nice little bow, so we get some slice of life stuff after all of Misaka's midnight escapades. She goes and gets some juice, meets the boring kid Toma, and Shirai's glad Misaka's back to her normal self. And her clone, number 10,031, tells her the project hasn't actually been stopped at all. And you can just tell from hearing her own voice again just how surprising and disturbing this is to her. But wait, you say, I thought she was just upset about the people running it. I mean, she destroyed the labs and all. Even if the project is still going, she might be a bit irritated, but this is a little bit of an overreaction, isn't it? Unless, maybe, and I could be reaching here, Misaka, who has a tendency of hiding her feelings in so many other regards, wasn't entirely forthright stating that she doesn't care about her little sisters. Maybe she was just hoping that her ransacking of the labs would be enough to stop the project, and she would be able to maintain her self-image despite literally seeing the image of herself destroyed beyond recognition. Yeah, to nobody's surprise, Misaka is a little bit more upset than her initial statement lets on. It's at this point that Misaka realizes that if the project is still going, this couldn't be some underground thing. Academy City is monitored constantly by a satellite computer, tree diagram, and if all of her intervening has changed nothing yet, not only is Academy City okay with it, they're likely supporting it. and even then, Misaka is determined to continue down the path of stopping this project, to the extent where she's accepted that her life going forward isn't keeping firm the status quo, but completely rewriting it, and what damage that might mean for her relationship with her friends. So Misaka continues her quest in disrupting the project, this time by hacking into the supercomputer. She, however, learns that Tree Diagram has been destroyed weeks ago. This has broader implications for the world as a whole, but what it means in this story arc is that her last reasonable way of stopping the project was never even an option. While trashing yet another lab, she vows that someday, whenever she might get the chance, she's going to wipe the project from the face of the earth. But the nagging thought in the back of her mind asks her the very piercing question. What if that day doesn't come? And what happens between now and then? During this time, we also get Toma and 10,032 taking care of a stray cat, and him stumbling upon the grisly aftermath of Experiment 10,031, an experiment that Misaka proper got to see the conclusion of. After looking for Misaka and finding Shirai, who is all business, he finds Misaka's notes on what's been going on and goes to find her. And he finds her on a bridge. Now, there's a lot of stuff here, but the key points are these. Misaka assumed Toma was there to berate her, and she's very confidently come to the conclusion that the only way to halt the project is not to fight Accelerator and win, which she deems to be impossible, but is to barely fight and die, to disprove the last of Tree Diagram's predictions, and how even after coming to this conclusion, she's still trying to play up her suave facade to Toma and herself, despite her internal thoughts being contradictory. After brief discussion with him on the full context, she is still adamant about her right to die in place of the remaining 9,969 remaining sisters, and is still more than willing to fight Toma about it. But when shown repeatedly that he won't fight her about it, she nearly kills the noble idiot. After he regains consciousness, he explains that he's gonna fight Accelerator to stop the project instead. For context, Boring Kid has boring ability where his hand just cancels other people's skills and powers. And then, the most underappreciated part of the scene, as Toma runs off to find Accelerator before Experiment 10,032 happens, Misaka beckons the cat over. Yes, this small thing is very significant. I'll explain more later. Toma finds the experiment already underway, and as much as I'm not a fan of Toma as a character, I do relish that he very literally demonstrates to Accelerator what pain is. But the key point of this scene has little to do with Toma or Accelerator at all. It comes when Misaka proper does two things. The first is to acknowledge that she can't solve all of her problems alone, so she asks for help from her sister. And the second is when she refers to her sisters as her sisters. And not just that, but she refers to herself as the big sister, implying a level of responsibility that she was denying for a long time. Eventually, Toma gets up and throws another punch to actually put Accelerator down for the count, and we cut to tomorrow. Misaka visits Toma in the hospital with cookies and he sucks. She then meets with 10,032 where her sister muses about how the sisters had a purpose, as gruesome and as cruel as it was, but now they're left without one. So 10,032 asks if Misaka proper would be willing to give some kind of guidance on how to live without a designated purpose, to which Misaka proper responds with affirmation. Misaka proper then meets Toma again with more cookies outside of the hospital, and he doesn't suck, but he's still dumb. Shortly thereafter, Shirai shows up again talking about how much trouble Misaka is going to be in for sneaking out repeatedly over the last couple of weeks, an assurance that things are in fact going to return to normal. So ends the Sisters arc in Railgun. But not really. While the story arc itself had wrapped up at this point, it's pretty clear that Kamachi Kazuma knew he had something impactful here, as the aftershocks of this story ripple into the greater Indexverse. While that's not particularly special for this world with its notoriously complex storylines, what is special is that from this point onwards, we see a whole bunch of characters introduced here. And I'm not just talking about Shinobu showing up in the Silent Party arc, or even Team Item's significant role in the Battle Royale arc. Clone 10,032 showing up again is inevitable, but several more of Misaka's clones, 13,577, 10,039, and 19,090, all have small roles in the future, as well as others that aren't identical to all the rest. We've got Dolly, who's a significant factor in the Daihachi Festival arc, Misaka Worst, yes, that's her canonical name, who appears a bit older than Misaka proper, and Last Order, who's actually a main character in A Certain Scientific Accelerator, another spin-off featuring this arc's main antagonist looking after her. So, while 10,032 is really the only character from this arc that's set up to show up in the future, the series seems to keep drawing and drawing and drawing from the Sisters project for more and more sources of characters and plot points. And honestly, the arc is so good that I can't really blame it. But what makes it that good? First off, if we only got Index's take on the story, I don't think the impact would be that big. It's the obvious conclusion, given that Misaka is our point of view, they are her clones after all. And there's bound to be more of an emotional journey interacting with your own clones than that of an acquaintance. Another part of it, I feel, is just because Misaka is a better character than Toma, especially in this arc. Toma has things happen to him for a while, where he meets Sisters and is confused, and once he finds the murder scene, he goes straight to the person who he assumes already knows more for some answers. And that's where he finds all of his answers because she's already done all of the detective work here. Then he literally punches the problem in the face repeatedly until it goes away. Misaka, on the other hand, does all of the detective work, then tries to stop the project once before Toma's even introduced in this arc, and more before he actively gets involved. She also does a fair bit of punching problems in the face if that's what you're here for, and because of her abilities compared to his, the scenes are far better when she does it. Second off is, in addition to doing more in this story, Misaka develops quite a bit more from this story. You remember that naive line I pointed out earlier?
やっぱり薄っ気味悪くて私の目の前から消えてくれって
Yeah, that one. Contrast that to her attitude towards the end of the arc, where she's convinced that the sisters deserve somebody better than her in their lives, where she's very actively ashamed of how she behaved previously. She's so concerned that she made the original mistake of donating her genetic information to help people with a debilitating illness that she views all this suffering that they go through as her fault. How dare she try to improve the world? Now go feel guilty about saving 9,969 lives. And this misplaced responsibility leads to yet another key character building moment, which is learning to ask for help. Through the entirety of the arc, Misaka goes into ludicrously dangerous scenarios alone because of her own guilt. She insists that all of this that's happening is her own fault, and she believes that her own hyper-competence should be enough to shut everything down while saving face, despite the fact that we know her friends will not just accept her, but would assist her in their mission. Misaka even goes as far to remind herself that Mom's not here to fix things for her, and no hero is going to swing in to solve the problem, up through the point where she's willing to sacrifice herself for the cause. At that point, it's not about problem solving or weighing options. It's justification for her own death. But as dire as the straits she's in are, the first time she asks for help, it doesn't matter that nobody's immediately near her, it doesn't matter that it's not an actual request and is instead out of frustration. Help shows up. In fact, help refuses to let her die. Follow this up next episode where her request for help is directed at someone she thinks has every reason to hate her, and is in terrible shape. But help comes anyway. She realizes that her own hyper-competency, in this situation at least, means nothing. The instant there's one obstacle she can't overcome, it doesn't matter how nimbly she traversed everything else, and it's not worth throwing her life away over. She doesn't want to die. There's people who care about her, and they still will after learning whatever sin she thought she committed. Beyond why it's great from a characterization point of view, cats. The several interactions with cats that we see through the series are all plot relevant, usually through developing relationships between characters, but every one of them is also a representation of Misaka's relationship with her sisters as well. And while it might not hit you on the first watch, it is impossible to miss on subsequent ones. The first time we see these cats, it's even firmly established that this cat is number 9982. Her first line is a meow, after all.
Meow.
The cat got in the tree because of her trying to help somebody, and mistakenly putting it in danger. Just like how Misaka trying to help dystrophy patients created the whole situation to begin with. Misaka proper initially ignores it, prompting 9982 to ask if Misaka proper is okay with it dying, mirroring Misaka's own turmoil about the death of her thousands of clones. Our second is just a brief reminder, giving Misaka flashbacks about 9982, and our third is immediately after she runs into 10031, resurfacing at the exact same time it's revealed the project isn't done yet. Next, there's Toma and 10032, where 10032 clearly wants to help the cat, but is unable to do so, and the connection where the cat is the sisters and 10032 is Misaka proper is established even further when 10032 insists she can't help the cat because of their electromagnetic sensitivity that other people don't have. And it's not that the cat doesn't like her, but it finds it hard to deal with her. When she does eventually feed the cat, he looks delighted, and when Toma becomes pushy on the matter, leaving the cat with her, she asks if the cat is still angry, or if he is delighted again, displaying Misaka's willingness and drive to intervene, Toma's hand in the matter, and the mending of the apprehension rift from Misaka's side. And in our final appearance, our kitten is actually the first to show up when Misaka asks for help. We get a super zoom in on its eyes when discussing how the sisters are treated like lab animals, and in the end of the scene, Misaka beckons the cat over for the first time in the arc, finally accepting these girls into her life. And if that's not enough, in the short continuation of the scene from the following episode, Misaka wonders if it's the same cat as before, saying she can't tell them apart, but just like the others, they each have a life. And the final reason why this arc works so well is the normalcy that is sprinkled throughout the story. We want Misaka to be able to return to her regular life, knowing that she did everything she could, knowing that she saved all that she could. Because at the end of the day, these people care about her. And she has some of the most supportive friends that I have seen in any media. To the extent that Shirai's character arc in this part of the anime is about how she shouldn't be constantly worried about supporting Misaka. This girl here, she is not James Bond. She is not Natasha Romanoff. She is not Ethan Hunt. It is not her job to stop secret plots and save the world. You want to know what her job is? She doesn't have one because she's too young to be legally employed. You know what I want most for her? To have the powers that be just leave her alone so she can get lunch with her friends or sneak out of her dorm to go to the movies. This is why I love that we get those moments where she's looking for the Gekota badge with a bunch of kids and looking for a 4-leaf clover. These moments are such a crucial contrast to include in such a brutal storyline about saving your doomed clones from otherwise inevitable death. It's not an accident that after the dire situation presented in this arc, the next episode is just the girls getting food for a study group. Granted, for the show to be what it is, we need that danger, and trouble will find them when Misaka's the third most powerful being in a city, and 2 of her 3 best friends are basically child police. That just leaves Saten, which brings me to my actual final point. A certain urban legend hunter. Give me Saten just investigating weird gossip, often with the other 3, and if the rumors turn out to be true, nobody's life is at stake. That is a side story that I would watch the hell out of. Next time, I'll be talking about a show worth watching for a single episode.